What if I told you that one man, born into a modest family on a small island, rose from obscurity to conquer nearly all of Europe? What if this same man, once hailed as a military genius, ended his days alone in exile? This isn't a work of fiction. This is the unbelievable, true story of Napoleon Bonaparte. Stick around, because we're about to journey through the epic life of a man who reshaped the world. To understand Napoleon, we first need to understand the world he was born into. The late 18th century was a whirlwind of chaos and change. France, the heart of Europe, was imploding. The French Revolution had torn society apart. The old order was collapsing, kings were being dethroned, and the guillotine became a grim symbol of the new republic. Amidst this turmoil, with France at war with its neighbors and tearing itself apart from within, the nation was desperate for leadership, for heroes. And from the smoke and fire of revolution, a young, ambitious artillery officer was about to seize his destiny. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, a rugged, independent place that had only recently become part of France. His family, the Bonapartes, were minor Italian nobility, far from the glittering circles of Parisian high society. As a boy, Napoleon was sent to military school in mainland France. He was an outsider, short, serious, with a thick Corsican accent that his wealthier classmates relentlessly mocked. They saw him as a provincial upstart, but while they laughed, Napoleon studied. He devoured books on history, strategy, and mathematics. He was consumed by the lives of great commanders like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He didn't just read about greatness, he planned for it. This relentless ambition, this burning desire to prove himself, would become the driving force of his entire life. The French Revolution was the perfect storm for a man like Napoleon. The old aristocratic officer corps had been decimated, either fleeing the country or facing the guillotine. This created a vacuum, opening up opportunities for talented men from any background to rise through the ranks based on merit, not birth. And Napoleon was more than just talented, he was a prodigy. At the Siege of Toulon in 1793, he brilliantly used his artillery expertise to recapture the city from Royalist and British forces. His superiors took notice. His star began to rise. But it was his campaign in Italy that truly cemented his legend. At just 26 years old, he was given command of the beleaguered French army there. It was a poorly supplied, demoralized force. Napoleon transformed it. He moved with lightning speed, striking his enemies before they could combine their forces. He was bold, decisive, and had an uncanny ability to inspire his men. He would tell them, "Soldiers, you are naked, ill-fed. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world," and he delivered. His victories in Italy were stunning, forcing Austria to the negotiating table and bringing immense wealth back to France. He returned to Paris not just as a successful general, but as a national hero, a savior of the Republic. The public adored him. The government, however, feared him. The government in Paris, known as the Directory, was corrupt, weak, and deeply unpopular. They saw Napoleon's growing fame as a threat. So, they sent him to Egypt, partly to disrupt British trade routes, but mostly to get him far away from the center of power. While the Egyptian campaign had mixed results militarily, Napoleon used it as a masterclass in propaganda, sending back reports of glorious victories and scientific discoveries. Meanwhile, back in France, the political situation was deteriorating. Sensing his moment, Napoleon abandoned his army in Egypt and made a dramatic return to Paris in 1799. The people welcomed him as a hero. With the help of key political allies, he executed a swift, bloodless coup d'etat. The Directory was overthrown. At the age of 30, Napoleon Bonaparte became the first consul of France, the most powerful man in the country. But for a man with his ambition, being first consul wasn't enough. In 1804, in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, he took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. The young officer from Corsica was now Napoleon I, Emperor of the French. As emperor, Napoleon set out to build an empire that would rival that of ancient Rome. His instrument for this was the Grande Armée, arguably the greatest fighting force of its age. It was a meritocratic army, where even a common soldier could rise to the rank of marshal. It was mobile, well-trained, and utterly devoted to its emperor. For nearly a decade, this army seemed invincible. Napoleon, a master of strategy and tactics, led it from one spectacular victory to another. At the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, often considered his masterpiece, he crushed the combined armies of Russia and Austria. He redrew the map of Europe, placing his relatives and loyal marshals on the thrones of conquered nations. He reformed legal systems with the Napoleonic Code, a revolutionary set of civil laws that promoted equality, property rights, and religious toleration. Many of its principles are still the basis for legal systems in dozens of countries today. For a time, it seemed as if all of Europe would fall under his sway. He was at the zenith of his power, the undisputed master of the continent. But empires are built on shaky ground, and power, especially absolute power, creates powerful enemies. The nations of Europe, led by a stubborn and resilient Great Britain, refused to bow forever. They formed coalition after coalition to bring him down. The constant warfare began to take its toll. The Spanish Ulcer, a brutal guerrilla war in Spain, drained French resources and manpower. But Napoleon's most fatal mistake was his invasion of Russia in 1812. He led the largest European army ever assembled, over 500,000 men, deep into the vast Russian plains. The Russians, however, refused to give him the decisive battle he craved. Instead, they retreated, burning their own villages and crops, luring the Grande Armée ever deeper into their territory. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he found a city largely abandoned and set on fire. With no supplies and the brutal Russian winter setting in, he was forced into a disastrous retreat. The freezing cold, starvation, and relentless Cossack raids destroyed his army. Of the more than 500,000 men who entered Russia, fewer than 100,000 made it out. It was a catastrophe from which he would never fully recover. The disaster in Russia was the signal his enemies had been waiting for. A new, powerful coalition of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden, funded by British gold, rose against him, Europe united to throw off the French yoke. Outnumbered and with an army of inexperienced new recruits, Napoleon fought a brilliant defensive campaign in 1814, but the odds were insurmountable. The Allies closed in on Paris. Facing betrayal from his own marshals, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. The master of Europe was exiled to the tiny island of Elba off the coast of Italy. It seemed the story was over, but Napoleon was never one to accept defeat. He watched from his small island kingdom as the restored Bourbon monarchy in France quickly became unpopular. He knew the French people and the army still held a deep loyalty to him. So, in one of the most daring gambles in history, he escaped from Elba. He landed in France with just 1,000 men. The troops sent to arrest him instead flocked to his banner, shouting "Vive l'Empereur." He marched on Paris without firing a shot, reclaiming his throne in what became known as the 100 Days. The powers of Europe, stunned, quickly assembled their armies once more. The final confrontation came on June 18, 1815, on a rain-soaked field in modern-day Belgium, the Battle of Waterloo. It was a close, brutal fight, but by the end of the day, Napoleon's army was broken and his final dream of empire was shattered. This time, there would be no second chances. He was exiled again, this time to the remote, wind-swept island of St. Helena in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a prisoner of the British. Napoleon spent the last 6 years of his life on St. Helena, dictating his memoirs, crafting the legend that would outlive him. He died in 1821 at the age of 51, but his story didn't end there. His legacy is as complex and debated as his life was dramatic. Was he a tyrant who plunged Europe into wars that cost millions of lives? Or was he a visionary reformer who spread the ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and meritocracy across the continent? The answer is, he was probably both. He left behind modern legal codes, efficient systems of government, and a new model of warfare. He inspired nationalism, not just in France, but in the very countries he conquered. He proved that a single individual, through sheer force of will and genius, could change the course of history. From a mocked schoolboy to an emperor who made kings tremble, Napoleon Bonaparte's life remains one of history's most epic tales. If you find stories of ambition, power, and destiny as fascinating as we do, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It really helps us create more content like this. And let us know in the comments, which historical figures' epic stories should we tell next? We've got so many more legends to explore. Thanks for watching.